IACRN UK and Ireland branch meeting. Hi Deirdre, I've just seen you come in. You made it. So welcome. So happy International Clinical Trials Day, everybody. An amazing last year. Well, amazing however many years you've been in research, but especially perhaps the last year. We thought we'd quite like to start today just with a bit of reflection. And we'd really like to just share some thoughts with. We know that lots of people have thought about, lost family or friends and colleagues in some instances as well. So before we start today, we'd just like to do a 1 minute silence to reflect on those and all of the situations that we've been through in the last year, just to give ourselves some space, but also to think and to really celebrate and be proud about the hope that we have given people over the last year, and that we continue to give in research. So if you would all just join us in a 1 minute silence, please. Thank you very much. So it's great to see you all this morning. We've got a jam-packed agenda for you again today. I hope those of you that came yesterday aren't too shattered and managed to get some sleep. Thank you very much to Jen as well for hosting all of the visits and for organising it all in the first place. And also for being up pretty much every night for the last week in various time zones as well. So.
Next slide. And that's where the Count Me In survey came. Next slide. So this study was designed to measure and describe the research nurse and midwife workforce in Ireland. The primary objectives were to determine how many research nurses and midwives are currently working in Ireland and where are they located, who they work for, what their terms and conditions of employment are, and their main roles and responsibility. A secondary objective of the survey was to create a national clinical research nurse database. And due to the requirement to complete the study within a short time frame, we felt this had to be a high-level exploration rather than an in-depth investigation. But we hope that the results would actually identify key themes that would inform and define further research projects. Next slide, please. So the aim was to include the entire population of clinical research nurses and midwives in Ireland. We guesstimated there was approximately 200 research nurses and midwives working in Ireland, and this was based roughly on the number of our own members that are known to work in locations such as clinical research centres and clinical research facilities. However, we also know that there are clinical research nurses and midwives working independently of these facilities who are working in primary care and other locations such as research charities and clinical trials network. And we were particularly keen to make contact with these nurses who may not even know of the existence of the organisation or may not have previously engaged with us. Next slide, please. So the inclusion and exclusion criteria were participants were eligible if they were a nurse or midwife and they were currently on the active register of the Nursing and Midwifery Board of Ireland, and if they were currently employed in a research role or setting. The exclusion criteria really, if the role involved an element of clinical research, but it was not the primary focus or responsibility of their job. If they were a nurse or midwife completing their own nurse-led research for academic awards, so nurse researchers. Now, we did have considerable debate over whether nurses or midwives that are employed in another role but who become involved in clinical research as part of their role, whether we should include them. However, the general consensus was that these nurses held a substantive role, usually within the health service, and that their role and their job was not impacted by the research activity, and they usually had a secure contract. So we felt it wasn't appropriate to include them in the population. Next slide, please. So this was a quantitative study and it's collecting descriptive data. The data collection tool was developed using SurveyMonkey, and the survey questions were developed to measure the objectives as we outlined. We made sure we decided to keep the survey responses anonymous to encourage participation without the concern that participants would be identifiable. The research environment in Ireland is quite small, and we felt by asking questions specifically what therapeutic area they worked in may actually easily identify participants. The survey validated, we asked an external researcher that had knowledge in this area to read through the questionnaire and just to evaluate whether the questions effectively captured the objectives under investigation. We also asked a local clinical research nurse to complete the survey and to provide feedback on its usability. As I said previously, we couldn't give a definitive number of clinical research nurses and midwives in Ireland, so sample size was not determined for the study, as our aim was just to reach as many participants as possible. So the survey collection took place from the end of January to mid-March 2019, and we disseminated the information by direct emails to our members, advertising on the website, sharing it in the newsletter and on social media platforms. And we sent large broadcast emails within organisations such as the Health Service Executive, and also asking other champions of the IACRN and other stakeholders to disseminate the information. As expected, there was a huge uptake in the first few weeks, and then participation waned a little bit, and then we did another kind of advertising campaign, and that gave us a burst towards the end. Next slide, please. So we use the SPSS software package for our data collection, and we initially carried out some initial data analysis using SurveyMonkey, and that actually helped us to identify some additional responses and additional variables. And this came about from where some of the questions had the option of other, and participants could add their own free text. And we found that there were a few themes in those responses that we can actually use as additional variables to measure. So we manually input the data from SurveyMonkey into the SPSS package. I did that myself. And then Deirdre did a 10% QC comparing the hard copies to the data entered into the database. So I'll just go through the results. And next slide, please. So there was a total of 143 responses. However, 2 participants were excluded because they were nurse researchers. So a total of 101 responses were included in final data analysis. And when we look at the demographics, we saw that the regional distribution of clinical research nurses and midwives broadly reflected the location of the clinical research facilities in the country. So as you can see, 60.4% of responses came from nurses in Leinster. And we know that within Dublin alone, there are 4 clinical research facilities. In Munster, there are 2 clinical research facilities in Cork and Limerick, and you can see there's 27.3% responses from there. In Connaught, there's the Galway Clinical Research Facility. Now in Ulster, we only had 1 response. Now you can see from the map, there are 3 counties in Ulster that are part of the Republic of Ireland, that being Monaghan, Cavan and Donegal. The remaining 6 are part of the UK. So we're not sure whether the low response indicates a lack of research activity in these areas, or whether a failure on our part to actually engage with clinical research nurses in this area. Next slide, please. So when we looked at work location, we saw that there was a relatively even distribution of clinical research nurses and midwives who are based in a hospital setting compared with those located in a clinical research facility. And in terms of employer, the majority of research nurses are employed by the clinical research facility. The other reflects 31%. And when we looked at this further, we found that nearly a quarter of research nurses are employed through the Health Service Executive, which is actually more than we expected. However, we feel that these are probably nurses that work within the cancer trials units that are usually encompassed within the HSC, rather than other research nurses within other therapeutic areas. And when you look at the two charts, you can see that the figures for work location doesn't actually correspond with the employer. And this is because the clinical research nurse may be employed by the principal investigator or the research organization or charity, but they will actually be located within the clinical research facility or hospital. So the two figures, the two charts don't necessarily correspond. Next slide, please. So when we look at role titles, we know previous studies have highlighted the lack of consistency with the role title for nurses and midwives. However, in this study, the majority reported that they used the job title clinical research nurse, and the other category accounted for management roles such as research project manager or clinical trials manager or project lead. And these roles are usually specific to the facility or the organization or a project. Next slide, please. So when we looked at the number of years in post, we found that almost half the respondents were less than 2 years in post, while just over a quarter were in post between 2 to 5 years, and less than 30 of the respondents were in their current post for more than 5 years. So this is quite surprising, considering that the research facilities in Ireland have been in existence for up to 20 years, and the newest facilities have been open for at least 10 years. So this could be another indication of the lack of permanency of the clinical research role. Next slide, please. And although nearly half the respondents were less than 2 years in the post, more than 60% of them reported that the salary scale was at the clinical nurse manager level, which begs the question as to why they're paid at a senior grade. Next slide, please. And I suppose one of the shortcomings of the study is that we only asked nurses about their current role. So it's difficult to determine if they're being paid at an appropriate level without the knowledge of their previous experience. So nurses, although in the current role for a short period, may have enough experience that actually warrants the pay salary they're actually paid at. And I suppose the limitations of the survey impacted the scale and depth as to which we could go to in terms of collecting that information. But it's certainly an area that we'd like to explore further. Next slide, please. So when we looked at the years in post and the contract type, we found that the majority were on a fixed term specified purpose contracts. And again, this would correlate with almost half of the respondents being in post less than 2 years. Usually contracts of this type are renewed for another fixed term period, but this is largely dependent on the funding and is not guaranteed. And again, this can negatively impact the job security of the role. However, on a positive note, we were pleasantly surprised to see that 34 of the respondents were actually on a permanent contract. And again, this could reflect on the respondents that were HSC employed. Next slide, please. So the correlation between the contract type and employer show that the majority of the CRNs were employed by clinical research facility and the PI, and they were either on a fixed term or a temporary contract. Now, these employers are likely to have no regular salary review, and this is in stark contrast to HSC employed CRNs, where the majority were on a permanent contract and likely to be on an incremental scale with a regular salary review. And this is a significant difference between and shows inconsistencies between employees of CRNs, that those that are not employed by HSC tend to have a poorer deal in terms of their contract type and their salary review. Next slide, please. And then we looked at academic qualifications, and we asked nurses about their highest academic qualification attained. Now, since 2013, all nurses graduating in Ireland have graduated with the Bachelor of Science. So we expected that the majority of the respondents would have a Bachelor of Science. In our study, over half the respondents have completed a postgraduate diploma or a master's, and just over 2.8 have been awarded a PhD. Just over 7% of the respondents reported that they had not undertaken any third level education. But I think overall, this demonstrates a commitment to learning and illustrates the high level of education and qualification of clinical research nurses, and particularly given the fact that a lot of nurses may not get funding or study leave to actually complete postgraduate courses. So they're doing it in their own time and often funding it themselves. When we asked about specialist course, we found that more than half of those surveyed had not completed the clinical research course. And I suppose that actually then obviously substantiates the fact that there currently is no standardized clinical research nursing course in Ireland. Next slide, please. So we looked at the roles and responsibilities, and we found that they were largely determined by the setting and the type of research undertaken. The senior or management duties were primarily responsible of research nurses employed at a clinical nurse manager or director of nursing grade. However, we did find in some cases that clinical research nurses employed at staff nurse level were actually undertaking these high level functions. And that may be, due to staffing levels or, skill mix, we weren't sure. Over 60% of research nurses worked in clinical trials of an investigational product, and there's a clearly even distribution across the other areas, and other represented areas such as translational research, observational, genomic, and genetic research. And then, as I said before, to avoid disclosing identity, we didn't ask the specific question about the therapeutic area in which nurses worked. Next slide, please. So the last section of the survey looked at clinical research nurse satisfaction, and we asked nurses to complete a Likert scale, just given their level of satisfaction and agreement in terms of the questions we asked. So you'll see there in the green column, we've actually merged agree and strongly disagree, and strongly agree, sorry. And in the yellow column, we've merged disagree and strongly disagree. So surprisingly, more than 53% of nurses were satisfied with the job security in their current role. And this is despite the fact that a significant number of respondents were not on a permanent contract. Just under 54% were satisfied with the job-related training received locally. However, a similar number expressed dissatisfaction with the educational opportunities available to them nationally. And this could again be due to the fact that there isn't a standardized, specialized research course in Ireland at the moment. So they're really dependent on what is provided at a local level. When we asked about career pathway, more than 50% were dissatisfied with the career pathway available to them. And I think then crucially, 12% agreed that the contribution of clinical research nurses to clinical research is not recognised and respected nationally. Now, I wonder if we had done this study maybe last year, would that figure be a lot more? I think certainly clinical research in general and the work of clinical research nurses has been highlighted and recognised given the pandemic from last year. So it would be interesting just to see, how those figures changed in comparison. Next slide, please. So in this table, we cross-tabulated the responses to the statement, I am satisfied with the career pathway available in clinical research with the type of employer, just to determine if the type of employee has any correlation to the satisfaction level. So we found that 59% of clinical research nurses employed by the PI were dissatisfied with the career pathway. And this could be due to the fact that these clinical research nurses are usually on a fixed term or temporary contract with perhaps have less opportunity to progress on the career pathway. Next slide, please. And next slide, please. However, what we found quite surprising, oh, sorry, back again, sorry. Thank you. What we did find surprising, though, is that although a high percentage of health services like HSE employed CRNs were found to have a permanent contract with a regular salary, there was still a high percentage that are dissatisfied with the career pathway available to them. So although their terms and conditions were a lot better than their counterparts, they still had a high level of dissatisfaction. So I suppose it just goes to show that, it's not necessarily the terms and conditions that actually have an implication on the satisfaction with the job. Next slide, please. So we had a free text section at the end of the study where participants could have their own optional comments before finishing the study. Next slide, please. So some of the comments were, I feel strongly there should be a career pathway that having completed 1 to 2 years, we should be in permanent roles with increments. I have over 20 years experience in research, but a secure purpose contract, I had to accept a drop in salary. Next slide. Sorry. I would like to be recognised by my success today. There is no opportunity for promotion. I have proven my capabilities time and time again, and it still isn't recognised. Next slide, please. New staff can start on the same salary with no experience or training. They will ultimately make a lot of mistakes and learn on the job. but this is not good for the quality of the research outcomes. So these were some of the comments that we've had from in the free text section. Next slide, please. So just some recommendations from our study. In terms of contracts, we feel that CRN should be employed as core staff, and they should be in permanent posts with all the associated entitlements at a grade that is appropriate to their roles and responsibility, and with prior clinical research experience taken into consideration. Currently, this is not the case. They're basically paid according to the funding available and the budget available. They should be allocated studies as appropriate to the needs of the study, and there should be annual increments of salary review, which is on par with nursing services. Sites that have sufficient staff numbers should aim for a workforce skill mix from entry level all the way through to specialist advanced practice or management grades. Novice CRNs should be supported by more experienced colleagues and have a realistic expectation of career progression based on competency and experience. And I feel if this is the case, then you're more inclined to have staff retainment rather than, I think, nurses coming in, spending 2 years, finding that there's no clear defined pathway and then seeking employment elsewhere. Next slide, please. CRNs should be supported in accessing educational programs appropriate to their specialised area of practice, and there should be a national CRN support function or office should be established to provide professional support and advice to CRNs. Source or develop training and educational resources and maintain the clinical research nurse database, and there should be support for R&M activities. Currently, all the members of the working committee actually give their time voluntarily. Most of us have full-time or part-time jobs. We have family commitments as well, and certainly given the pandemic last year, we had added additions of work-related functions and stress, but we still, we try to maintain the RNMN as best we can, but it is on a voluntary basis, and I think it really needs to be supported, and we need to be supported in our activities. What we'll find, I think, is as people's own commitments increase, there'll be a fall off of membership, and which won't be replaced. So we definitely strongly feel there should be some sort of support for us as an organisation. Next slide, please. The Health Research Board and Department of Health should enter negotiations about the status of CRNs and consider an agreed number of CRNs to be employed through health service, regardless of salary or source of salary. And CRNs should be employed through academic institutions that hold honorary contracts with all their affiliated hospitals to enable seamless research activity. And there should be access to nursing education and professional support. And I think CRNs should be involved in all decisions about future employment status and their career pathway. Thank you very much. I'd just like to acknowledge the funding that we got from the HRB for this project, and then also the research facility at RCSI, the project steering group from the RNM committee, the statistical support we got, and from the RNM committee and project steering group and study participants. And there are no conflicts of interest to declare. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, Carol. That was brilliant. I have a question. Do you mind if I ask? So I was thinking, with the you were asked as a priority to do this project, weren't you, as to identify the number of research nurses and midwives, and I just wonder if the HSE said why they particularly felt that was important, and also how did they respond once you'd completed the project?
Well, it was the HRB, and they were quite enthusiastic because they're often asking us, how many research nurses are there? And we said, well, we don't know, to be honest. We can guesstimate, as we said. We know there are CRS and CRCs around the country, and we know we have our membership. But we do know, every so often we'll meet somebody and, oh, we didn't know you exist. Where do you work? So the answer was, we just don't know. So I think they were enthusiastic about this study from the outset because it would give the answer. Now, it didn't actually give us the full answer. We did reach out to many people, but we didn't get a definitive answer. We presented the findings at our conference in 2019, and the director of the HRB was there. There wasn't much response, I suppose, in that respect. I mean, it was the end of 2019, and then we went, I suppose, headlong into 2020. Sort of thing. I suppose what we from the recommendations, we hope that it would actually open the discussion, and it has to a certain level, but we haven't gone any further than we were previously. I think the right noises were made, but no action has been put in place. And we are hoping to have further funding down the line. And as I said, this was a high level research, given the fact we had to complete it within 6 months, but it has highlighted, key themes that we feel do need further in-depth research. So we hope if we do get further funding, we can actually, do further research. But certainly we can only go so far as an organisation. As I said, we're a voluntary organisation, so we're limited by what we can actually contribute. But also, we have no national authority to kind of mandate any of the recommendations we made. So we really do need to, I suppose, meet with the HSE, with the HRB, the main stakeholders that actually can have the impact. We've kind of made the recommendations, but we can't kind of put them into action without funding, without the help of, bodies. So
I think what you've achieved is incredible, because it's been a few years since I was last over to see you all, and I think what you've done in that time is just amazing. I know the point is you haven't managed to find a definitive, but I think that's really, really hard to do. And so I think what you have achieved is outstanding. And the recommendations that you've had they're just brilliant. They give a perfect platform as to where to go next, don't they? So to me, it feels like the next step is really important to have that kind of dialogue with those organisations and see where things go. But you're such a strong voice in Ireland, aren't you, as a group? And you always have been.
I think we've certainly we've increased awareness of us as an organisation, and actually at the 2019 conference where we presented this, the chief director of nursing was there as well, and she was very encouraging, very enthusiastic. Unfortunately, she then retired shortly afterwards, and her predecessor again stepped into post at the beginning of 2020, and I think it was just the year that was in it. She's been extremely busy with the pandemic. Now we have our conference this year will be virtual, and we have actually asked Rachel Kenner to present at the conference, and we're going to hopefully use that opportunity to discuss our recommendations and where we go from there. Hazel, who was the chair before me, reached out to Rachel at the beginning of last year, but it just wasn't wasn't, unfortunately. But we haven't given up, and I think we kind of have to keep pushing forward. They do know we're here. I think we just have to to push forward, and hopefully it's knocking on that door. I think it's making sure that we're at the table when the discussions are made, rather as in the meetings are held and then they say, well, let's just ask the RNN what they think, which has been the case previously. So it's making sure we're actually at the table for the discussions.
Yeah, I think don't be disheartened. I think honestly, what you're doing is brilliant, and it's really, really important. And I think, if it helps, we still don't know in England either how many, or in the UK, how many research nurses are on. This is a really hot topic of conversation generally at the moment, and came up a couple of times here and there over the last few weeks at various conferences. But we are trying to do something about it, and we'll definitely be in touch as well, because I think that we should probably do something all together. But that conversation's just happening in the background. I can see Jen nodding. So we've got there's some politics, but that's fine, and that's life. But we will get there, and we can do it. And I think all together, we do have a strong voice, and it does say a lot about the value of once you know what your workforce really looks like. I think how you've approached this, I think it's just a brilliant, and you've got to have a starting point. I think that's the thing, isn't it?
Absolutely.
You've got that now. You've got a baseline. So we don't have that yet. Sorry, Gloria.
I did see some questions there. I have a few minutes before I leave. I can answer some.
There
was a comment from Elise saying such a relevant study, and I think she's suggesting that something needs to be undertaken in Africa as well. So maybe if you could share your methodology with Elise, then that would be appreciated, I'm sure. You've kind of touched on this, but she's asked, have you actioned any of your recommendations, or what's your plan to action these?
Our plan to action them is that we presented them at the our conference in 2019, and we had to submit a report to the HRB, and at the moment we haven't been able to. A lot of our recommendations in able to action them, we kind of need the support of the government bodies, of the HRB, of the HSE, and without that we can't really move forward. So a lot of that involves their engagement and funding as well. We will need a significant amount of funding to put a CRN support office in place to develop a standardized clinical research nurse course that is available nationally. There needs to be funding behind that. So unfortunately we haven't actually put anything into action because we do need the support and funding from the large stakeholders.
Yeah, and I think the having a course specifically or aimed primarily at clinical research nurses is, I know, something that you've done a huge amount of work on in Ireland previously, and it's something that I'm quite passionate about as well, because I think part of the difficulty is we don't really know how many clinical research nurses or midwives are there, but we know that there's a lot. And at the moment there's very little specific educational provision for this group. And that certainly needs to be rectified. But one other thing I would add in is yesterday we were talking about IACRN certification, and some of the free text comments that your participants had about being able to evidence their experience. Hopefully the certification would be able to help to evidence that in terms of promotion. So I think there's another couple of comments about vacancies and things. So you can probably see the comments, and it's about kind of advertising and getting jobs in Ireland and things like that. So maybe if you could have a wee look at that, Carol, and then
Deirdre's replied as well, just to say.
Okay.
So in the chat you've made some comments there, and also I've popped in. So Elise in particular, I'm thinking for the Count Me In survey, the team have got that on their website. So I've put the link direct to that in the chat for you, so you can have a look at that. It's brilliant. I refer to it all the time.
Here, I'm based. Someone's just moved that. Sorry, 1 second. I'm based in London and I tried to get a clinical research job a few years ago, but there were very few jobs available in Dublin. I have 7 years experience, including haematology, oncology, dermatology. It was very hard to get a research job in Ireland. I managed to find just one job and I was unsuccessful. There is an issue with jobs. Often jobs are either advertised internally or often word of mouth. Now, if we get a request to advertise a job online, we do advertise them on the website and people can see them that way. But often it can just be a word of mouth and there's no infrastructure. And even in terms of the job description, there's no clear defined job descriptions for research nurses. So as we're saying, there's a real disparity in pay scale, because you could be someone who's experienced many years of clinical research experience, but the job you're given, the salary is just based on the funding available for that project, but you could be working alongside someone else who's doing a job that's less requires less experience and being paid more. So there's no, and I think that's not necessarily the fault of the PIs. They've no direction in terms of they've no job description to turn to say this is the competencies that a research nurse should have at this level or this level. So I think that's something that needs to be standardized as well. That's very important. You know, makes it very difficult on both sides in terms of getting a job and vacancies, filling those.
Yeah, thank you, Carol. And just a note to, Elise says thank you. She's got the link. Kathy's just put, I think from this presentation, I will develop another study here in Tanzania. And is the study published? Yes, Kathy, it is. If you just go up the chat, you'll see the link and you'll be able to go and see the full report there. Do you feel, Vicky, that a standardised course may be able to be developed for both north and south of the border?
Well, the north of the border is the UK, so that comes under the UK, but certainly those Deirdre ran a clinical research nurse course very successfully, and it was attended, by many research nurses over the years. However, it was seen kind of not to be financially viable. So that's why there's no longer any support for that. But I don't know whether there could be a cross-border, standardized course. That's something we.
Okay. Thank you. Jen, I can see you've got your hand up. Once Jen's spoken, I'm just going to go over to Deirdre for your next presentation, if that's okay.
Thank you. Thank you for squeezing me in. I just wanted to say how lovely. Thank you. I've seen updates about this work over the years and heard some from colleagues. I just want to say thank you. And I also want to say that I think, having listened to work that's happening around the world this week, I'm thinking about Africa, and I'm thinking about how people are overcoming boundaries and obstacles. I think that through the chapter, the UK and Ireland chapter, through the excellent work that already exists in Ireland, and the track record you have of education, and the desire that everyone has to build something for the research nurses wherever they are, I think we need to think about education core curriculum that's coming from IACRN very soon. Some of you have contributed to that, which has been brilliant, and it makes it a truly international curriculum. And I think we need to work together to make sure we produce something that we can implement here in the UK and perhaps share with our other international colleagues, and get international colleagues to help input into that. I'm thinking of Elise and her expertise as well, and how we can collaborate to create a curriculum to grow more research nurses and to encourage more people to become nurses, because one of the pathways in nursing will be clinical research. So that's my 2 pennies, and thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jen. Deirdre, I've just mentioned you, but I've just remembered that Siobhan's next.
That's fine,
do you mind which order?
No, that's
Okay.
good. Yeah, that's fine.
Carol, thank you ever so much, Carol, and have a good rest of the day in the thunderstorm.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Carol.
So we'd like to welcome Siobhan, who's going to talk to us about a project on raising public awareness of sepsis. Over to you, Siobhan.
Hi, thanks very much. Can you see my screen? Can you see?
Well, you're a bit quiet, Siobhan.
Yeah, we can't hear you.
Yeah, can you see my screen?
Yes.
Brilliant. Okay,
Marvelous,
perfect.
thank you.
So, yeah, thanks very much. So thanks, Carol, and thanks, Deirdre, for letting me have a few moments to tell you about a project. I was funded in 2019 by the Health Research Board and the Irish Research Nurses and Midwives Organisation. They gave me seed funding to do an initiative that I'm quite passionate about. So I've always had an interest in sepsis awareness, and I suppose as a clinical research nurse, I'm always, facilitating other people's projects. So it was a wonderful opportunity to be in the driver's seat. So let me tell you about the story. So exactly 2 years ago today, this woman on the left is Yvonne Young, and she is a group lead in our hospital for sepsis awareness. And we were at a stand promoting clinical trials and clinical awareness, trials awareness. And I said to her, I've real interest in sepsis awareness. And she said, well, will we try and do something together? I said, leave it with me, put in my application to the Irish Research Nurses and Midwives Organisation for some seed funding. And we came up with a project. So let me tell you about this. So just a few quick facts. Sepsis is, of course, the abnormal life-threatening response to infection. There's around 15,000 cases of sepsis in Ireland each year, and around 1 in 5 people with sepsis will die. The majority of sepsis is community acquired, and approximately 80% of patients with sepsis present to the emergency department. We know that increased awareness and education are imperative to facilitating early recognition and prompt treatment of sepsis. So I talk about health literacy in the title, and I suppose it's so important that, I say to people, health literacy is not about the ability to read. It's really, have you ever gone to an appointment and you've come out there going, God, I don't remember anything about the appointment or what the doctor told me or what the nurse told me. So really health literacy is about the ability to gain access, to understand and retain the information that you get. And it's really promoting and maintaining good health for our population, for our communities and for individuals. So again, the successful seed funding provided me the opportunity to deliver on my initiative. And how did I go about it? So the aims of the awareness initiative were to educate the public and patients on signs and symptoms of sepsis. I wanted to increase sepsis awareness using an innovative health literacy approach. So I created a fridge magnet, and it highlighted sepsis recognition and symptoms. And I provided sepsis awareness education sessions at community venues. So the first step was to create an awareness of sepsis within our hospital group. So back in 2019, on International World Sepsis Day, the first thing I did with funding was to light up the hospital with image projections on the signs and symptoms of sepsis. So we displayed them onto the University of Limerick Hospital building during the visiting hours, and we had great chats with patients and with relatives coming to visit, and it really generated a brilliant platform just to highlight sepsis on International Sepsis Day. It had a good impact on Twitter with 2.7 views from that day. And the next step then was to design a sepsis awareness fridge magnet and deliver community-based sepsis awareness education sessions. So this is an image of the fridge magnet. And again, people asked me about the colors I used. I tried to keep in line with the hospital group template. So it was very bespoke to our hospital. And again, the fridge magnet, I provided anybody who passed me with one, and during the workshops as well, everybody who attended a workshop received a fridge magnet to bring home. So what did the community approach look like? This is my local town of Newport in County Tipperary, and it has a population of 2,000 people, and there's various groups. There's adult education, there's music groups, dance groups, sporting groups. So I literally started knocking on doors and said, would you let me come talk to you about sepsis awareness during your breaks? So literally I kept knocking, and I was very welcomed. And a workshop really entailed me coming to speak with the group. I'd ask them pre the workshop, what do they know about sepsis and how confident would they be in recognizing sepsis. So I just used a simple Likert scale and asked people to document where they felt their confidence was pre and post. And also it just generated a nice discussion on how to look out for sepsis. What would you do if you felt you were very unwell? So I started, first group was the first responders, fantastic group. And, you know, it was wonderful to hear from them because they were so focused on, you know, respiratory arrest, cardiac arrest community, but they also get called now for, you know, patients who have deteriorated. So a great opportunity to update them on sepsis awareness. I went to the local men's shed choir, and these were just a fantastic group of men. They had tea and all ready for me. So a very welcoming group. And I suppose, you know, an older age group of gentlemen who a lot of them live on their own. And they said, you know, they often would sit at home if they were sick and be afraid to kind of call a doctor. So I really enforced to them, don't be afraid to reach out for help. The local daycare centre provides a facility where people can come and be just general care during the day and activities. And again, another group that I suppose would be quite isolated. So wonderful to reach out to them and educate them on sepsis. I went to adult education groups. I went set dancing. I also went to the local musical society. They're going to create a sepsis song for me, so I'm waiting for that. And I suppose just to look at, you know, the impact of this initiative and what footprint have I left on sepsis awareness. So statistically, I am not a statistician, nor do I love statistics, but I suppose from the data that I did collate and the confidence scores in recognizing sepsis, it has a very good impact. I've been told that the mean has increased from a 4 to 8. So I do know that the community education on sepsis has had a big impact, with a big increase from a 4 to an 8. With regards to feedback, again, you know, people have said I'd never heard about sepsis, but I've heard about sepsis, but I would never have known the symptoms, and I definitely use the fridge magnet. The session has been an eye-opener, great opportunity, great to have health education in our community. I'd like to welcome some more. Really enjoyed learning about the signs and symptoms, and keep up the great work. So I suppose, what does the future hold? Obviously the pandemic, you know, has paused some future implementation, but I hope to get back on track again now during the summer. But I'd like to hold focus groups going forward to generate maybe a more robust project that could be rolled out nationally. So I'll obtain ethics and do focus groups again locally within my own group. I'd like to collaborate further with the National Sepsis Group here in Ireland, seek additional funding opportunities. Obviously, publication is very important to disseminate the findings, so we'll be working on that. And my real dream would be to implement a sepsis awareness program at primary school level. So what have I learned from this initiative? So for my own reflection, I certainly know that in a small capacity, this has definitely increased awareness of sepsis. It's been a very positive community experience. And I think for research nurses, we definitely have an ideal opportunity to get into our communities and educate our local people on, you know, all aspects of healthcare. And whether you're working on a project that's specific to a disease area, you can take a piece of that and promote health within your own community. I suppose the power of collaboration. I've really learned the power of collaboration between my passion for research and then other people's expertise in the area of sepsis awareness, and together you're definitely in a stronger position. Unique commitment. You know, when you're doing a project like this in your own time, I had lots of support, but you know, there was a lot of cold evenings and I dragged my little boy out with me. So definitely the commitment. The funding was the golden ticket, so I'm so grateful to the HRB and to the Irish Research Nurses Midwife Network, because this wouldn't have happened without the funding. And it was such an enjoyable project, and I'm really looking forward to getting on track again. So this is Ted, my little man, and I always knew if my sepsis initiative failed, that I would make a mint from selling the fridge magnets, because they're the most ideal form of childcare you could ever provide. Honest to God, they just spend hours putting them on, taking them off, putting them on. So fortunately, it was a success. But yeah, I had an alternative project if it didn't work out. So I suppose just to leave you, you know, when I was so excited to receive seed funding, and you know, I work with researchers who maybe get awarded millions for projects, and mine was, you know, a seed fund. But I suppose the biggest thing is never underestimate the power of a planted seed, because as you can see from a seed fund, I've had a great success. So thank you very much.
Wow, congratulations.
Marvelous.
There's so much. Gordon, did you have a question? Did I see something pop up in the chat?
No, I just think yet again, you know, the fabulous work that's been done in Ireland is just amazing. And I think, you know, it's a real inspiration to the rest of us, you know, about how you can use funding in different ways to help to support clinical research nurses to find out more about the work patterns and the challenges that clinical research nurses have, but also in an example of the seed funding to be able to undertake programs and projects that you're really passionate about as well. So no, really well done.
Yeah, congratulations. I've got a question. When are they going to do your song for you? Will we get to hear it?
I knew you'd ask about that, Claire.
Don't worry, that'll be the next. I know. We'll get back on track. It's been like everything has been stalled for a year, so I'll get them back on. Don't worry, it'll happen. But yeah, you know what? It's funny because I'm looking at Deirdre here to my right on the screen, and she's just, honest to God, so amazing. Like I could go to her next year and go, do you know what? thinking of like a musical initiative, whatever. And she's going, right, okay, well, you know, send in an application. And so Deirdre and all the team in Ireland, you're just phenomenal leaders for women and for research and men, but they're just incredible people to have known, and I'm very grateful.
So sepsis and musical.
Yeah.
Yeah, clinical research, the musical, yeah.
Brilliant. Thank you ever so much, Siobhan. I think that's the perfect time to hand over to Deirdre, please, for a little bit more around the IRNM.
Okay, thanks. And I just have a couple of little slides just to find you, if I can find them. Here we are. Sorry, I'm breaking in a new laptop. So can you see my screen there?
Yes, thanks.
Okay. So I just, I suppose it's just to wind up after Carol and Siobhan, and I really want to say thanks a million for Carol and Siobhan for stepping in, because Gordon probably told you I got a text from him late, was it Monday evening or Tuesday evening?
Even Tuesday.
Yeah, and because between cyber terrorists and storms and COVID, we've had quite a few challenges. But anyway, I just want to tell you a little bit about IRN, and I think I might be on the wrong slide there. So this group, we were set up, and it was really thanks to some HRB funding really all along that we've been able to function. But we were set up in 2008 as the Irish Research Nurses Network, and last year we changed our name to Irish Research Nurses and Midwives, and you can tag network onto the end of that. And the name change was really a result of a proposal at the previous year's annual general meeting. And also it coincided nicely with the Year of the Nurse and International Year of the Nurse and Midwife. But of course, we didn't know what was going to happen, that we weren't going to be able to get together and have any celebrations for the foreseeable future. But that's the way it worked out. So we've been very fortunate to obtain funding from the Health Research Board over the past number of years. And because we proved we could use it and contribute to the national infrastructure, really the amount of money we got has steadily increased over the years. But as Carol mentioned, we're a voluntary group. We're trying to fit this into our day jobs. And with the COVID proved anything, it proved how fragile that structure is really, because people were pulled back to clinical. Their workload increased dramatically. I mean, even some of us who weren't doing patient-facing roles went back into them to help out with the clinical trials during COVID-19. So, I mean, that's some of the challenges we face. Now, for those of you who aren't familiar with the network, we have our website for members, and the links are here. You'll find us on irnm.ie, and all our resources are there. A lot of them are publicly available, and now we're starting to have some limited members only resources. So these are the services we offer to members. We have an annual conference and professional development events. We developed quite early in the day a research nurse and midwife orientation pack, and we have revised that a couple of times over the years. Because one of our functions with our grant support was to provide educational events, and we couldn't do that in the last year, we actually focused some of our energies on developing online educational modules, and they're hopefully going to be launched before the end of the month for members. We have a few recordings there, and we're hoping to build on that further. We really are, I suppose, a national network and support group for research nurses and midwives, and also for others in the health research infrastructure. As Carol mentioned, and maybe Siobhan alluded to, you know, people reach out to us when they need something, and, you know, we circulate information to members and so on. One of the key things we offer at the moment to members is access to funding for networking and professional development. And as Siobhan very well demonstrated, seed funding for projects. But again, the issue here is we're managing this on top of our day jobs, even though I'm very lucky to be in the position to be the grant holder at the minute, the PI on the grant. And I am supported by my organisation to spend time on that. So, you know, that's a lucky kind of circumstance at the moment. And we're also able to provide representation at national and international working groups and committees on the back of the funding we obtain. So I suppose what I want to leave you with today is that we're now at a situation where the money is running out, and our grant actually should have ended in June this year, but we've had to look for an extension because we weren't able to spend the money for over the last year. So we have a no-cost extension on that. But at the moment, we're in the position where we're having to plan ahead for next time and what happens. So, you know, do we continue on? Unfortunately, and I know some people ask very good questions of Carol, what was the outcome of your scoping project? We made very strong recommendations about the need to be incorporated more into national infrastructure, to have a core support office for research nurses and midwives. And basically that hasn't happened. The most recent funding calls are very much about CRFs and developing their functions, their clinical trial unit functions, but there is no scope in that to employ research nurses as part of the clinical research infrastructure. The organisations are still pretty much on their own for that. And that actually leaves us still in a bit of a limbo. So what we have to decide now, do we actually take this ourselves and continue to be the support group for research nurses and midwives? Sorry. So we have to think about, for our next funding application, how do we expand the supports offered to research nurses and midwives in Ireland? Can we actually be that support office and that infrastructure within an academic institution or within the National Support Hub for clinical research, which would mean we actually have to provide staffing ourselves to provide that function instead of somebody else doing it. So we actually have to do a bit of scoping on all of this ourselves at the moment. So what I want to do is, I suppose, reach out to the people online and ask, do any other countries and networks have a model of support for research nurses and midwives that we could learn on from, and that could help us develop our future strategies for supporting colleagues in Ireland. So we'd be delighted to hear from anybody who has any suggestions. We're in a position that we could go and do some site visits and or invite people to visit us, and certainly we can have online meetings and conferences. So we'd be delighted to follow up from today with anybody who'd like to give us some ideas. So I'll just finish by saying, Gaurav Mahagal, thank you, and thanks for involving us in today's events.
Thank you, Deirdre. Jen has put in the chat, I think we need a meeting. Jen, would you like to come in?
Yeah, thanks. Brilliant presentations.
Yeah. Thank you.
Siobhan, my husband developed sepsis suddenly in 2016, and I didn't recognize it, and I'm a nurse. So the more awareness you can raise, the better. He survived, but it was very scary, and he might not have. So Deirdre, as ever, I think we need to talk. And I think we have our new director of nursing here at IACRN now, and she's thinking big and broad. And I think there's some opportunities through NIHR, but also through IACRN, and how we can continue to develop and support and encourage this. And I know that we had conversations through the CRF network when the CRFs were being funded in Ireland, and they took on board recommendations around the funding and how they might be structured.
And that worked for a number of years, but never turned into a permanent model, I suppose, is our problem.
Yeah.
And now there's plenty of people still in jobs, if you know what I mean. We're not saying that people have lost security, though some people did lose jobs according as funding streams fluctuated.
And you had the lovely Dr. Love, who was in post and so supportive. So somebody must have come in after him, and let's get some meetings organized. Fabulous.
Yes, definitely.
Ideas.
You just like saying Dr. Love, Jen, don't you?
I do.
She does.
Start singing. I'm going to start singing and dancing to the song.
Fab. Deirdre, thank you so much.
Thank you. I'll stop sharing here.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Yeah,
Deirdre.
just really looking forward to seeing what happens next. And I feel like I'm saying that constantly over these visits, but it really does feel like something big is about to happen, and it's really great to be part of that, isn't it? You're Jen nodding away. Bless you. So thank you both ever so much, and thank you to Ireland for doing what you're doing and continuing to do, especially voluntarily, because it is appreciated, no doubt about it. So thank you very much. So we'll move on to the Southampton story next. So we've got some videos to play you over the next hour or so, and there's Jane. Hello, Jane. Thanks for joining us. And the other Jane, the two Janes, you're both here. So Gordon's just going to share the videos. We'll go through those first, and then Jane, and Jen are here for any questions and things afterwards. Thank you. And for anyone interested, Deirdre's just popped her email address in the chat box as well. So do feel free to contact her.
Hello and welcome to the presentation on clinical research at University Hospital Southampton NHS Foundation Trust. This is a broad overview. I am Jane Martin, the acting matron for the NIHR-CRF Southampton, and I'm presenting with my colleague Jane Forbes, lead research nurse and specialist in QA in education. The background on myself is I qualified as a children's and adults nurse. My career as a research nurse started in 2000 in Aberdeen, where I worked on a commercial study on the genetics of asthma. In 2009, I moved to Southampton and progressed in various roles within the paediatric team based in the clinical research facility. And at present, I am the acting matron, and this is a role that I secured as a secondment due to Jennifer Allison, who you all know, taking on a national role during the pandemic. And over to you, Jane.
Hi there. Yeah, I'm Jane Forbes. I initially trained as a nurse, but have spent most of my career as a midwife. And in 2009, I started my research career as a research midwife. Throughout the last 12 years, I've worked in lots of different research areas and led different research teams. I'm currently working as the lead research nurse specialist for quality assurance in education. This involves working with all our research teams, providing expert advice and support, especially within our ward-based studies and our complex studies, and working closely with the clinical teams as well. I also ensure that all our research processes are undertaken to the highest quality, whilst sharing best practice with the teams and providing consolidation learning for our teams as well, as I also oversee the education team. So I'm just going to share our presentation today. Sorry, bear with me. Our PowerPoint seems to have disappeared. There it is. Oh, and it's gone again. There we go. Apologies. Okay. So first of all, we wanted to share our research vision with you. Our vision is leading the delivery and conduct of high quality research at UHS, at University Hospital Southampton, enabling the teams to carry out research to the highest standards for the benefit of patients. So our goals are to ensure a safe patient experience. We're lucky here at UHS that research is considered part of our core business. We provide ongoing education and development for our staff, whilst ensuring that we have the correct capacity and capability to deliver on our studies. We also take part in promoting research at a local level, national level, and also internationally. And we look at how we recruit and retain our participants closely, as well as from a staffing point of view, recruitment and retention of our staff. So as you can see, our patients are at the heart of what we do, as well as the support and development of our staff. At University Hospital Southampton, we are one of the largest acute teaching hospitals in England. To put our location into context, for those of you attending from overseas, we are based in the south of England here on the slide. So our annual spend in our hospital is 7 million, and that's based over 3 sites in the area. Our services are for 1.9 million local people, but our specialist services serve 3.7 million people in central, southern England and also the Channel Islands. In University Hospital Southampton, we have approximately 10,500 staff, of which 3,500 are nurses. And again, just quickly looking at our population figures, the UK itself has 66 million. Wessex, where Southampton is based, has 1.3 million, and Southampton has just under 1 million. So I mentioned the Wessex region on the previous slide. The Wessex region is part of the National Institute for Health Research. Now, the NIHR was created in April 2006. It's a virtual organisation known as the research arm of the NHS. And it's the largest funder for health and care research. It supports researchers in world-class NHS facilities to conduct leading-edge research. As the most integrated clinical research system in the world, the NIHR drive research from bench to bedside for the benefit of patients. Here we are in our NIHR clinical research network of Wessex. And again, you can see us down the bottom. We're number 11 there on the screen. NIHR is broken into 15 regions over England. And our one is Wessex, which is hosted by University Hospital Southampton. We work very closely with our other regional partners to deliver research to the patients of Wessex. In Wessex, we have 21 regional partner organisations covering all aspects of healthcare, including mental health, community, and our acute specialties.
So this slide was designed by a colleague, and as it says, it really shows the complexity of our environment in Southampton and the wealth of opportunities that brings. As we can see, our local area of Southampton is in the centre, with University of Southampton, our public and patient engagement, and UHS. And then we reach out to partners regionally. So we've mentioned the Wessex region already, and nationally and internationally. All of these leading to a wealth of collaboration. If you look closely on the right, you'll see the IACRN logo, and then on the left, the UK CRF network are also present there. Next, we're going to play a video that we filmed, which is made for staff recruitment purposes. So Jane will just swap the screens over, and then we'll be back with you.
Can you see that, Jane?
Yes.
Cool. Okay, so let me just get back to our Zoom meeting. Okay, so I'll just share the PowerPoint again. Hope you enjoyed that. Nice upbeat music. Lovely.
There we are. So, as you might have noticed from the video, you saw staff working on and off site, but the image on this slide shows where we are based at University Hospital Southampton. So, Southampton Clinical Research Facility was opened in 2001 with millennial funding from the Wellcome Trust, starting with 14 nurses. There was an expansion of research at UHS with BRU and BRC formations. Later, the trust-wide team was formally established. The existing cancer team was incorporated under the umbrella of a wider research team and their leadership. So now, in 2021, having moved away from silo working, we have a large, cohesive, flexible workforce working under one senior leadership team, trained to deliver a wide, complex portfolio of varied research studies. And the next slide. So this is our CRF facility. The images you can see, we have 14 consulting rooms, including a viral suite and pediatric rooms, a bronchoscopy suite with 2 negative pressure rooms and recovery bays, 4 high dependency and 4 low dependency areas, and then a range of specialist rooms, including laboratories, a temperature and humidity controlled chamber, environmental chambers, and the PATU lab. The staff at the CRF deliver early phase work, phase 1 and phase 2 studies, experimental research, ATIMPs and vaccine studies. Alongside this work, other teams deliver across the trust in outpatients departments, ED, community, for example, schools and homes. Our research covers all ages and disease groups. So moving on to this slide now. This is UHS research unique selling points. So these are just some of the strategies, resources and working practices that enable UHS to carry out research at a high level. The CRF is currently funded by NIHR on a secure 5-year funding pattern. We are one of 21 sites across the UK funded in this way. There are numerous research nurse teams based across the region, and during the pandemic, we have created a new workforce model, which has enabled these Wessex-wide teams to support us in vaccine delivery. Our off-site hubs were designed to facilitate multi-location recruitment for vaccine studies. So far, we have recruited approximately 2,000 patients at these locations. Our in-house education team were instrumental in facilitating the training of regional nurses and measured their competence prior to them working at the hub. The education team also deliver the UK CRF network taught induction package to all our staff and provide ongoing support and development to all staff. Pre-pandemic, our workforce already employed flexible working hours and days to deliver their workload, but the pandemic has shown the necessity of flexibility in the working environment and team makeup also. An example of this would be the respiratory studies stopping and the whole of the respiratory team being redeployed to the vaccine studies. Our working model of utilising support teams, for example, project management, lab and admin, releases our trained nurses to focus on patient care. And over to Jane.
Thank you. Our senior leadership team work closely with our UHS Chief Nursing Officer, and for the past few years, our research nurses, allied health professionals and clinical trials assistants have had permanent job contracts. Additionally, we have posts where a member of staff works half-time as a research nurse and half-time in the relevant clinical area on a joint post. These posts really help to foster a collaborative experience with mutual benefit to both areas. For some years now, our research staff have also provided support to clinical areas in times of overwhelming capacity. To us, this is called Black Alert and is relatively rare, but when it happens, our research workforce are ready to help, particularly in our emergency department, for example. Over the COVID-19 pandemic, we were also able to help in the clinical areas that needed additional staff to see us through the worst of both waves. Likewise, during this time, our staff had development opportunities that they were able to take advantage of. You'll hear a little more of these later on. One of the things we're really proud of is the breadth of specialities where we have research delivery teams running studies. And we wanted to have a look in more detail into the breadth of specialities that we facilitate here. So these are our teams in our clinical research facility. We have a paediatric team, an adult team, a vaccine team, and a rheumatology team, and a respiratory team. Within our trust-wide teams, we have a COVID-19 inpatient team, hepatology, renal and neurology, emergency departments, genetics, neurodegenerative, neurosurgical, dermatology, reproductive health, stroke and cardiac, critical care. These are some of our teams in the trust-wide team. There are a few more. And then we're also fortunate in our cancer teams to also be able to have a wide range of specialities. We have hematology, head and neck cancer, melanoma, gastro, gynecology, lung cancer, teenager and young adults, surgical urology, radiotherapy, pediatric cancer, and breast cancer teams. So we couldn't resist the opportunity to show some of our staff off to you.
Is that the end of one, is it?
Yeah,
yeah.
That's the end of that one, and then we should be able to load the other one.
Grand. Sorry, I was just waiting for it to start itself.
Thank you.
Patrons here at UHS. In March last year, we were tasked with delivering the increasing portfolio of urgent public health studies and safely refocusing our complex portfolio of research studies. All this alongside managing a workforce with rapidly changing health risk assessments and therefore a reduced clinical workforce, plus supporting the wider trust with the deployment of research staff to clinical areas of need. Working with Jen, Lisa and our senior nurses, we're proud to have been able to organise and deliver this portfolio. I'm now going to hand you over to Jen to introduce herself.
Thanks, Marie. I'm Jennifer Allison, lead matron for the Clinical Research Facility. And since the 1st of September, I've been seconded 3 days per week as an Associate Director of Nursing in a national role at IACRN. Prior to that, I worked alongside Lisa, who you'll meet in a minute, at the Vaccine Hub. I was usually the first to arrive and the last to leave, and leading on staffing, utilizing relationships I had across the region. This left Marie at the hospital side, as she's described, but I also provided that same support to clinical research staff during that period. We are delighted to be here to introduce some of our colleagues in this next session, reflecting on their many outstanding achievements. Thank you.
Thanks, Colin.
Hello everybody, welcome to our meeting. We wanted to take some time with you to reflect on the last year and really focus on our achievements and our successes that we've had during this time. And I know there are many people that have worked during this last year on our COVID experience, but we just wanted to bring just a few of you here to talk about your part in this story and have an opportunity for us to reflect on that time that we've had. So I think it'd be good to do some introductions first of all. So my name's Jane Forbes and I'm the lead research nurse specialist for quality assurance in education. I'm presenting today with my colleague Jane Martin.
Hello, I'm Jane Martin and I'm the acting matron for the CRF Southampton.
And Laura?
Hi, at the beginning of the pandemic, I was the senior research sister in the respiratory team, but due to an opportunity that arose, I'm now the senior research sister in the vaccine hub.
May?
Good morning, my name is May and I am a respiratory research sister. Initially, I was with the respiratory team, but then after COVID, I became the lead for the COVID team.
Karen? Karen, you're on mute.
Sorry, I'm Karen Salmon. I'm the Senior Research Sister for the Critical Care Research Team. During Wave 1, I was actually redeployed back to the critical care environment. And then after that, I came back into the role.
Thank you. Lisa?
So I'm Lisa Berry. I'm one of the lead matrons. My area of responsibility pre-COVID was phase 1 and cancer. Since the pandemic, my focus has changed and I'm now matron for phase 1 vaccine studies and ATIM.
Caroline?
Hello, I'm Caroline Grabau. I'm the Senior Sister in the Clinical Research Facility Adult Team.
Thank you. Kirsty?
Hello, I'm Kirsty Gladys. I'm the lead educator for the research team, and during the pandemic I was asked to cover Karen's team, so I was the Senior Sister for the critical care team for the COVID studies.
Thea?
Hi, I'm Thea. I am Senior Research Sister, and pre-COVID and during COVID, I looked after gastroenterology team, ophthalmology team, and diabetes team. And then I set up all the COVID studies and started formulating the COVID team.
Jenny.
Hello, I'm Jenny. Prior to COVID, I was a Band 6 research nurse, and during the pandemic, I have stepped up to being the paediatric senior sister.
Thank you. Louise.
Hi, I'm Louise Haskell. I am the Children's Senior Research Sister based in the CRF, and during the last year I have worked very closely with Lisa Berry and the vaccine team and Laura to deliver the vaccine side of the studies.
Lovely, thank you. So thank you so much for attending today's meeting. We thought it would be good to start sort of at the beginning of our sort of COVID journey, as it were. We're going to work through some of our reflections and experiences sort of maybe kind of chronologically as we were going through them. So I'd like to start with you first, Laura, if that's okay, as you started on one of our first COVID studies.
Hi, yes. So one of the very first COVID studies that started was the cough POC. So that was looking at evaluating point of care testing and the clinical impact that would have. We were set up extremely fast. I think we were from start to finish of the setup process. It was 1 week we had to set it all up. From first recruited patient to last recruited patient was 40 days, and we recruited 500 participants. So initially this was run by my respiratory team, but because of the vast amount of participants that we were handling every day, including all the follow-ups, we were very quickly joined by Caroline's team and also some of Thea's team from the Trustwide team. We delivered this study over 7 days. And it was a really brilliant first study that actually combined a collaborative approach. What some of the staff, because obviously this was the first study where we were actually dealing with COVID positive patients, and everything kept changing. So not only did what we were learning from COVID changed, also how the trust structured itself changed on a daily basis because of the flow of the participants. They were extremely eager. As soon as they realized we were running this study, we were actually getting phone calls from the doctors in ED and AMU, and from soon as the ambulances started to come in through prior to getting into ED, for us to go to do our point of care test. The reason was that our point of care test, we could manage to get a result back on average within 50 minutes, which not only helped the trust with being able to allocate the right patient flow, so the correct bed and the correct ward that patient then went to, but it also was for the patient's perspective as well, because not only were they seen quickly, but they got to the correct treatment faster. From a leader's perspective, because of everything changing and everything that was happening in the government and worldwide, for me, we set up like a buddy system. So I had all these members of the team working with me, and what we did was we paired each other up so that they had an experienced member of staff if they hadn't been to AMU and ED in any of the wards before, and also to help with anxiety, because obviously everything was slowly different. We were all learning about stuff. And for me personally, that led to me wanting more of this collaborative approach, more of a wider team approach, which has then led to the vaccine team that I now coordinate, because that is very multi-team driven, and that I really love about all the studies that we've been delivering in the COVID.
Fantastic. Thank you, Laura. I remember that study well, having worked on it with you sometimes, and it was the speed of it was phenomenal, and the patients certainly, the benefit was they got a result very quickly, which in the early days was quite vital for lots of different reasons. So while all that was going on and being set up, Kirsty, you were involved in helping set up the ICU studies. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Sure. So I remember us all having a meeting to sort of talk about the COVID studies and what the agenda was, and there was a few that popped up for critical care, and I know that Karen and half of her team had already been pulled back into the clinical service in preparation, and Marie Nelson, our matron, had asked with my critical care background if I could oversee the team for the time being, and for the new couple of studies that appeared to pop up. So that was fine. We sort of had some feasibility meetings, but during this sort of setup, which again was very quick, within sort of a week or so of knowing about the studies and getting the approvals through, it was clear from the international picture that we were starting to see that within the UK as well, and that we needed to act quickly and recruit as many patients and give them a potential treatment option as quickly as possible. The pace was pretty phenomenal, as I think we'd all agree, in terms of studies. We've all had to learn things super quick, but we've supported each other really well, I think, and helped just hold each other's hands along the way. As the critical care team was sort of redeployed, this also meant that as more studies were coming through to the crit care team, more trials that needed to be open, I had to pull up on the wider research nurse pool. So we had a lot of nurses who didn't have critical care backgrounds, but equally they knew the research process, and we did a similar thing in terms of buddying up, like Laura said, with sort of a more experienced research nurse, perhaps with the critical care background. So some team members did stay, we were able to do that buddying up. In order to facilitate that further and support them further, we had a daily huddle. So we had some staff members who were working from home as they needed to for health reasons. We also had staff members in multiple different locations. So that huddle at first was face-to-face, and as things started to change, we ended up having a mix of a virtual and a face-to-face huddle. We had that in the afternoon, and that appeared to work best for us. because we wanted to get in first thing in the morning and screen for our patients and pick up anything from sort of the later evening the night before. We also needed to cover sort of later working some days if we had recruits, and also weekends. And the team were just so flexible, and it's just a credit to them and wanting to help in terms of the bigger picture and getting these results so we can help treat people. What else to say? Oh, we also needed to pull upon some other research fellows. So some of their work had been put on hold, and we needed some sort of doctor support to be able to take that added pressure from the clinical team of doctors, of critical care doctors, and to be able to sign some prescriptions and be able to help support us in terms of retrospective consent once the patients had woken up. We could tell them about the study and their contribution, which was nice. Yeah, it was great. It was inspirational and great collaboration.
Thank you, Kirsty. It was the speed of everything was quite amazing to sort of see happen, and I know that you had to step out of a new role of an educator, research educator role, into a team leader role, which you'd previously done. So I guess it was quite a sort of a fast shift of mindset and pace to kind of redirect everything again.
Yeah, luckily I hadn't been in the educator role for that long, so it was still fresh.
Good. So thank you, Kirsty. So Thea and May, so the ward-based COVID inpatient studies were all being set up at a similar time, similar pace. Thea, what was that like for your teams?
Yes, so similar to what Kirsty experienced, we had to set up studies really, really quickly. Our normal process for setting up studies would be like 6 to 8 weeks. And in that time, you have time to learn the protocol, to know the study. But the aim of the CRN was for us to set up studies like within 9 days. So we were part of one of the big national trials, the recovery trial, which was a platform trial. And a platform trial is where you can put loads of new drugs or existing licensed drugs into one protocol, and that enables you to very quickly introduce a new drug into the system. So we had to set up really quickly. In that time, we had to train up doctors that wouldn't normally be part of research, the ward staff, and within 14 days of us knowing that we will take part in the study, training up everyone, we were able to recruit and randomize our first patient. So that was really an achievement for the team. And just to be part of the first drug that came available that was showing effects, a third of patients, it reduced mortality by a third for all really sick patients, and we were able to contribute towards that. So this study really drew collaboration nationally, and even within the trust. We couldn't have done this without collaboration with the ward staff and the wider MDD team. So that was really great for us to be part of that. In this time as well, we had several other inpatient studies then that were emerging, and to start off with, we were working in small groups on these individual studies, but as the pandemic continued, we realized that we needed a better plan for this to work. So it was, as everything was changing with what Kirsty and Laura has already mentioned, we too had to just adapt on a daily basis to these changes. And we quickly formed the COVID team. So I started off leading on the COVID studies, and then it became this huge team, and we recruited really well, working well together. And then the opportunity came then for May to step up to then take on the role as the lead senior sister for the COVID team. So I'll pass you over to May, and she will talk a little bit more about the collaboration between wards and the research team.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Thea. So yeah, like Thea has mentioned, so while the COVID team was being formed together, I was just a member of the team at the time. But then I have seen the visible leadership that the senior research nurses were doing at the time during the pandemic, when everybody was amidst the anxiety, the apprehension. But I have seen my senior leaders like Laura went to lead a vaccine team. I've seen my matrons go to the wards and help with the patient recruitment. I have seen Jane took up do the help with the proning team. So when Thea mentioned to me that we needed someone to step up for their role, and I said yes, I think this is something that I can do for the team. So to talk about the COVID team, I should say that it was really, I should say it was the worst of times, but it was the best of times as well. The worst of times because you have to deal with everyday anxiety, apprehension, uncertainty, but because of the visible leadership that we had from everybody, and the team just became confident. We were not just a team that worked together. We were a team that supported each other. We learned from each other, and every day we just come, just like what the other teams were doing. Probably it's the huddle that really, we talk about what went wrong, what went right, and from them and from there we we collaborated, and we really had strong collaboration with the wards at the time, because before that we were just nurses in gray uniforms, but because this time we have to follow them up wherever they go, the patients, whether they go to the ICU, whether to go to different COVID wards, so that we became very visible, and we had really strong collaboration with the clinical team as well. So everybody really worked very well, and we had a chance to work with all members of the research team coming from different specialties, and that really worked well because that brought together all the experience, the specialties, and we just shared all of that together, including the research fellows as well. But I think the greatest takeaway for me as an experience really is, aside of course from we were able to really deliver the studies very well, I believe. I think especially like studies of Accord, we ended up like being the #1 recruiter for that. Aside from being able to deliver the studies very well, and these studies translated into a standard of care of treatment for patients with COVID, is that every time we recruit a patient and we thank them for joining research, they always say to us, no, thank you for doing this for us. And I think that is the best thing that research has really done during COVID. Thank you.
Thank you, May. Thank you, May. That was lovely. So whilst all this important activity was going on in the hospital, obviously the way out of the pandemic would be a vaccine. So we're going to go over to Lisa now, who's going to give us an insight into how the vaccine work started and the hub. Over to you, Lisa.
So in readiness for this meeting and our discussions today, I've reflected and just what we've achieved in the past 12 months across the entire R&D department is astonishing. But I'm actually really blown away by what the vaccine team have managed. The COVID vaccine research has been critically important in the UK as part of our global response to the pandemic. And within our organisation, we've been ideally placed to deliver the COVID vaccine studies. And this is because of our previous extensive experience with vaccine research in adults, in children, first in human, through to our involvement in the swine flu pandemic vaccine studies, which I think Lou and Jenny will remember. In just 17 days in April, our nursing team had set up, we'd been selected as a site, and we had set up a Nightingale type research facility in an off-site non-clinical location a few miles away from our hospital. And within that 17 days, we'd also managed to recruit our first phase 1 COVID vaccine participant. And that is mind-blowing to me that we managed to do that and do it with such positivity and enthusiasm. But despite the positivity and enthusiasm, there were lots of challenges for us to overcome. The scale, the pace, the expedited timelines of the project, and the participant numbers that we needed to recruit was unprecedented. The design, the layout of the location and the patient flow needed to be assessed to ensure that we had space for social distancing. We needed to put approved risk assessments and controls in place place to reduce the potential for COVID infection and transmission. You know, on any day we could have 150 participants coming through for their study visits. Not only did we have to think about infection prevention precautions, but we needed to look at the location of the site, the size, consider the safety of it, security, parking, the distance to the vaccine storage areas, and also emergency vehicle access. So we all had to assess, this and put the controls in place. On dosing days, we required approximately 70 staff per day across different disciplines and specialties. And they all needed to be inducted and receive training, study-specific training, vaccine training, but also orientation and induction into this off-site setting. But our staff really, as May said, stepped up. They supported and buddied up with colleagues from across the region who came to work with us on these studies, and gave them a really good experience of taking part in vaccine trials or working on vaccine trials. The research changed in response to the data, and in the early stages of the vaccine studies, we were having protocol amendments every week, which required our staff to be retrained, and it also needed formal reconsent of our participants to the studies. Because we were in a community setting, we also needed to transport the vaccines across sites throughout the day and between the storage areas. We needed to consider GM processes, temperature control, temperature monitoring, secure storage, our documentation, the security aspects of it, whilst maintaining the blind. So all of this needed to be considered and included in our planning. And the logistics were complex. We needed to confirm the capacity of the building, our staffing requirements, what clinical equipment we needed. Was it paper documentation? Was it live electronic data entry we were doing? And in some studies we were. So we had to ensure that the IT access and infrastructure supported 70 people logging on at any one time. We needed to look at the management and the transfer of the clinical samples to the labs and ensure we had what felt like mountains of PPE. Working off-site meant that we had to develop new emergency procedures and risk assessments, and with the support of Kirsty and with the resus officers, those emergency procedures are tested via our emergency scenario simulations, which have been invaluable. We've had to ensure we have real monitoring during the study visits, and this is to ensure our QA oversight and governance. And our portfolio of vaccine studies has increased dramatically in the past 15, 13, 14 months. Some days we can have 4 to 5 different studies taking place in the same location at the same time. And within those studies, there can be 4 or 5 different visit types that are taking place. So senior nurse oversight and coordination of these activities is crucial, and Laura's done a fantastic job in adapting to this role in a short space of time with real close support and partnership senior nurse working from Louise, who is our unblinded lead, and also from Caroline, who is our lead for the symptomatic pathways, because the vaccine visits themselves is only one part of a vaccine study for the COVID studies. The other part is if they become symptomatic, we have to then follow a symptomatic pathway for each of the studies, and each pathway differs slightly depending on the study. So that's a whole host of other work and other team that we need to account for. As Caroline can explain, the nurses were consenting to these early phase complex vaccine studies, as well as designing the worksheets to support the documentation, data collection, audit and inspection processes. And given the speed and the frequency of the protocol amendments that we've had, that is a huge, huge job. So since the start of the pandemic, we have delivered COVID vaccine research in 3 locations prior to moving to our 4th long-term location in November. And we've also introduced and supported regional research hubs. For me, the response from staff has been so rewarding, enthusiastic, positive. There's been a real sense of teamwork, of people supporting each other, and a can-do attitude. The multidisciplinary team has worked beautifully together. But what has been really humbling for me is the phenomenal response from members of the public who want to take part and have taken part in the research. It has been awe-inspiring, and it's been an amazing year. It really has. I doubt I'll do anything as important for the rest of my career, and I'm just really, really proud to have been part of the team.
Thank you for that, Lisa. It's just phenomenal to think of everything that we've achieved, and you summarising the vaccine work so succinctly. So you mentioned about the large volume of staff that were needed to deliver that, and that's where the paediatric team were pivotal in that role. So we've got Jenny and Lou here who could give us a further insight into that.
Hi, as Lisa said, the challenges have been many, and for the paediatric team, I think the COVID pandemic has had different challenges. Obviously, early on, it became evident that children are not as affected by COVID as adults, and although there is a need to understand their diagnosis and treatment, with COVID, this need was not as great as it was in the adult population. With this in mind, initially, 40 to 50% of our team were redeployed back to the wards, which, from a management point of view, obviously was quite challenging, and the rest of us were able to support the initial rollout of consenting and chaperoning the participants. Very, very quickly, it became evident that we would need a large number of unblinded vaccinators, and we as the paediatric team were luckily able to offer this to Lisa and the team, as the nature of the paediatric studies that we've been working on previously meant that we were all, or almost all of us, trained and experienced in vaccinating both children and young adults. So at this point, we did have to quite rapidly bring back a large number of our redeployed staff to the research facility, which again was quite challenging. And we were then able to become the unblinded vaccine team, working very closely with Laura and Lisa and the pharmacy team to successfully deliver all these studies in a different way. And for us, it was more challenging with used to children and their families. This was adults, and a lot of them were a lot older adults than the ones that we're used to dealing with. So it was different. So so I'll hand over to Jenny.
Yeah. So one of the biggest things really to happen to our team as a paediatric team was to very much step out of our comfort zone. We were suddenly working with a really different patient group in a really different clinical environment. We were used to going up to seeing babies on children's wards or going out into the community, and there we were vaccinating adults. And this was really different. And myself, I was working as a children's intensive care research nurse as a band 6, and I had to step out of that into more of a leader role and jointly lead the paediatric research team, which was something I haven't done before. And that was a really incredible opportunity to be presented with. And I wasn't the only one in the paediatric team to be presented with a new opportunity. As Lou had said, many of us were already vaccinators, and those of us who weren't quickly did the training to become vaccinators, and those who already were vaccinators became teachers, and they assessed competencies and completed competency documents and became sign-off vaccinators, and to have that opportunity to become a level 4 vaccinator, which was amazing for them to be able to do that and offer that skill. So essentially, development and growth really became part of our team. Another thing that came out of COVID for the paediatric team was our links with the adult team and other research teams. We very much worked within ourselves and within our own paediatric research team, and we became part of the greater team and the greater Trustwide team, which was wonderful. And we all joined together really in one goal and one purpose. And in all honesty, what better way is there to encourage unity and partnership between all of us than to create a COVID vaccine? And it was great, and we've enjoyed the experience. and enjoy those opportunities.
Thank you, Jenny. And we were so pleased to have you step into that role in the paediatric team as I took on my acting matron role. So yeah, so we've talked about how flexible staff have been and having different roles. So during the beginning, when we needed to consent the adults for the vaccine studies, Caroline was part of that group of senior nurses that delivered that. So would you like to tell us just about how it felt, how exciting about being an IMP study, phase 1, etc.?
Yes, thanks, Jane. Yes, so it was, you kind of almost summed it up in a way.
Sorry.
That's absolutely fine. So I think all of us who were involved in the consent process, we all had various experiences of undertaking consent, but most of those would have been on more observational or non-IMP studies. So this was our first opportunity to be involved not just on an IMP study, but also first in human IMP study, and a study that had such a high profile because of all the public interest in vaccines. It was very prolific. It was very awe-inspiring to be asked to be part of that. My initial role was in the very first vaccine study, which Lisa had alluded to back in April. I was the lead nurse for, so I worked very collaboratively with Lisa and with the paediatric team to help develop everything. And that included working with Oxford to develop and support the team with things like developing an informed consent script, which we used. We also used our protocols and our study training and information sheet. So part of my role very much was identifying who the informed consenters were going to be on any given clinic day, ensuring that they're supporting Lisa and the project management team and the education team to make sure they had completed their training and study, and also to provide them with the scripts that we were going to use and go through those scripts with them to make sure they were happy. The scripts were pieces of paper which would contain just common information about the study and common answers to questions that might be asked. So a lot of us would read these scripts, we would memorize these scripts so that when we actually could talk with our participants, we weren't looking down at a piece of paper all the time. We could engage in that one-to-one, face-to-face contact, which was also something that we'd also hadn't considered, that reflecting back on. Having to wear PPE when you're trying to consent somebody, when you're socially distanced and they're sitting 2 meters away from you, and you've got goggles on, you've got visors on, you've got all the face masks on. Everybody's been involved in this will understand what I'm talking about, how that affects your ability to communicate. So it was very much a case of taking your time, making sure that you articulate really well, allowing the participants the time to question what you had to say. We had safety nets, and that was very comforting. We knew that we had clinical research fellows available so that if participants asked us questions, and sometimes they would ask us questions that were quite complicated, or we weren't able to answer because they were very much a scientific basis that we didn't actually understand, have that full level of knowledge. So our clinical research fellows were invaluable in supporting us with that. So it's very much a collaborative approach between us and our fellows. In order to support ourselves, we would, on every morning, we would meet and have a sort of a mini informal huddle between us consenters. When we get together, we would go through how many patients we had that day. We would talk about if there's been any substantial amendments and how that's going to affect our consent process. We would establish throughout the day as we went through the day if there were any problems, particularly if a staff member became unwell, how we were going to support that staff member and how we were going to support that informed consent process going throughout the day, liaising with the coordinators on that day. As we developed, we started to open up our consenting process, which was initially just adult paediatric and respiratory team here in a clinical research facility, to research staff, senior staff from other teams. So we started using nurses from our hospital cancer team and also the Wessex CRN team, which was amazing because some of these nurses were people I had conversations with, I had emails with, but I had never met because they were not based at site. So suddenly to put a name to a face and to meet them and to work with them was really, really good and really enjoyable for us all to be sitting there sharing our knowledge together, supporting this fantastic studies that we were given the opportunity to be part of. So in terms of training the other teams and also training band 6s as they started to come on roll, the band 7 we started to roll out towards the band 6s as well. We made sure again that they had access to the study training. We made sure they'd had their PIS and protocols. We made sure that they had the script, whether the script had been available from sponsor or whether we developed our own script and then had that approved by our PIs to make sure we were giving the right information. We also make sure that we had shadow opportunities. So new people joining us who had been consented would sit next to us, listen to what we say, listen to how we said it, and develop their own way of communicating, and then we would support them with that consent process. So we would be there as that extra support for them as they undertook that study. So it was very much a collaborative approach with just a huge amount of teams, which was just really enjoyable and really good to work, and gave us a really good sense of achievement. And in fact, the achievement was rewarded when later on we were actually, a number of our nursing teams were listed as authors in a number of scientific papers on COVID vaccines. So that was a real reflection of our hard work that we had done here in Southampton, and not just, and everybody was actually individually listed, which gave you that really good sense of achievement in quite a number of notable medical journals. So that was a really good reward. But the real reward, of course, was actually working with the public. They were so keen. I can remember that some of them were so keen. They would be like, just give me the consent form, I'll sign it. Don't just tell me anything else. And you'd be like, no, just let me sure that you understand. But they were so keen to be part of it. So you drew your real enthusiasm, your real energy levels from the public, because you really wanted them to be happy about what they were consenting, and you wanted them to be part of it. But you also wanted to make sure that they felt supported and they knew what they were consenting in. So I think from just taking away from that experience is that sense of achievement, being part of such a high profile study, and that experience it's given me on a personal level, experience it's given me with my networking and supporting my teams, working with paediatric nurses, adult nurses, respiratory nurses, CRN nurses. I could go on and on about the nurses that we've worked with, which is fantastic. And it's very much become, I believe personally that we've become very much a vaccine team, not separate teams. We are a vaccine team, and we work together so well on that it's just a real good sense of achievement for us all.
Thank you, Caroline. It's that kind of collaboration is just so visible, isn't it? It's so, and that flexibility that everyone happily enabled has been amazing. And Karen, talking about sort of flexibility, certainly in you had sort of different approaches to both of the COVID waves because of your pre-existing ICU skills that you already had and redeployment. Do you want to sort of have a reflect on your time?
Yes, it seems extremely different actually, listening to everybody else's perspectives. Myself and a few of my team are ICU nurses before we were research nurses. So the whole time we were preparing for COVID to come, our thoughts were we're going back to the clinical area. And so we were focused on upskilling, training, refreshing. I mean, for myself, it had been 10 years since I'd actually worked in ICU. So it was very clinical focus at that time. Then when we were redeployed back, things changed quite dramatically for quite a few of us, in that it was quite an isolating experience a lot of the time, because I think as Caroline said about when you're in PPE and you've got this plastic gown and a mask and gloves and you're in a side room with your patient and you're very busy, it's just you working on your own, and at times it felt quite lonely. But then the way that our trust worked was that for us to be able to care for our patients as well as we could, they set up a proning team, which involved staff coming from across the trust to come into the unit and help turn our patients. And that really highlighted to me the sense of team working that was going on across the trust, because you had no idea really what was going on outside of your little room on most shifts. And so you started to get to know people from theatres, specialty nurses, and actually it was really beneficial for myself. And also I had a tissue viability nurse helping on the proning team, and then she stayed on and helped me deal with some of the complex dressings with my patients. So that was when it struck me really that the sense of teamwork and collaboration that was, I think everybody else has talked about, that's when I really started to benefit from that. So I was on ICU for a couple of months, and then I came back to my team. Thank you, Kirsty. Had a new team members, new studies to catch up with. So that was an interesting time to find out what their experience had been like and what they had done and the speed of things. Because I don't know about anybody else, but I hadn't actually thought about what research is going to crop up during COVID. We were so focused on the clinical side of things that I was quite surprised and very impressed at how much, how quickly everybody had responded and how many studies there were. And then just as things were getting a bit more normal, we had the second wave. So by this point, obviously, because research had really grown to be such a vital piece of our hospital's work, the vaccines, the treatment studies, we weren't redeployed back to ICU as we were last time. So, but because obviously the need was still there, myself and another member of our team, we went back. As well as doing our research role, we went back and helped. As I know, Jane, you did, you were helping on the proning team.
Yeah.
And that was, again, quite different, a different experience. But again, the sense of teamwork. We had the fire brigade coming in to help on the proning team, which was quite nice. And I think the police and the army came to help as well. And so that gave you the bigger sense of the sort of community support and teamwork that was going on.
Yeah, it was an interesting time to, you know, what I can kind of pick up from everything that you're saying is there was a lot of support around for us all in various different places, sometimes places you didn't know existed, like outside, people coming to help, but also the opportunities that we had. From everything that we've talked about, there are some really clear opportunities that we have had afforded to us that we've been able to seize and you know, give ourselves more experience, more personal sense of achievements. You know, it's been really throughout such a difficult time, we have clearly had some really important support, but also some real development and opportunities to really, you know, have an important part to play in our teams and in our hospital. So I wanted to sort of draw this to a bit of a close now, but I really thank you for your time and sharing your experiences of this last year, which as you said are really individual but really important for us to really spend time to recognise the achievements, the successes, also that, you know, it was difficult at times, what we did to alleviate that, to support each other. You know, I see, you know, how well we have done that as a department, I believe. And so really, I'd like to thank you for spending time with us today and to wish you all a really happy International Nurses Day, because that's today. And have a great, lovely rest of your week. And I will see you all soon.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jane.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye,
Bye everyone.
Bye.
So thank you for joining us again. I think you'll agree that some of those reflections and themes will have resonated with some of you. So we're just going to do what's next for Southampton and then move on to the final slide. Over to Jane.
Thank you. So as well as our current research delivery activity, these are some of the newer areas we're helping to develop. So recovery, resilience and growth will be familiar to many of you as we recover from the COVID-19 pandemic, and we are looking to optimise our processes to get us started again and moving forward with this. We're very lucky to have such a supportive organisation here in Southampton who have ensured we have multiple pathways to support our staff. As you heard earlier in the meeting, there's also been development opportunities for staff as well. For our emerging therapies, so we are already delivering emerging therapies, so ATIMS, for example, but we want to increase our capacity as the numbers of these kinds of studies are increasing. And then lastly, there's a drive to focus on delivering early diagnostic studies within our cancer portfolio as well. So just a few of the things that we are sort of starting to work on for the future.
Okay, we'll just wait a minute for the next slide to come up. There we go. So, and finally, we're going to have some Q&A, but prior to that, I'd like to say just thank you very much for listening. Thank you to the IACRN for hosting this event where we've been able to share our presentation and the work that we do at Southampton with an international audience and our peers and colleagues. Whilst Jane and I dial in directly, we're just going to pop up a poem called Nobody Knew, and this was written by one of our research nurses, Helena Eagles. So we will join you in a moment. Here we are, we're finished. We may be able to put the poem in the chat if not, if there wasn't time to read it.
That would be fab. I got through the first few lines, so that would be great if it is there. That's all right. It started really lovely. I just didn't get the end.
It was about her experience of COVID and her team, and it was really pertinent. So yeah,
it would be lovely to see if you're happy to share. That would be great. There's a few comments in the chat that I'd just like to share with you. Thanks, Gordon, for popping that up. Jen says, very proud of research colleagues everywhere, and from Southampton, one goal and one purpose. So proud of my colleagues. Elise says, 1000% agree, Jen. This week of events has been truly inspirational on many levels. And then we have another comment. Thank you, Southampton team. It was excellent insight into your research activities, staff support, patients and facilities at your site, as well as your challenges with COVID-19 studies and how you have overcome these challenges. Well done to a great team.
Oh, thank you.
That's lovely.
It was really inspiring putting it all together, and especially the Teams meeting. It was quite emotional. So.
Yeah, I bet that was that was really nice to see. Thank you. And again, it's a different take on how to showcase what people are doing, and that's been really nice because every kind of almost every presentation that's come through has been quite slightly different and slightly quirky, and that it's been really nice seeing that. There is another question in the chat for you from Chifundo, who's at King CRF. The idea of a joint role sounds really good. How does it work?
There's various models. Some will do every 3 days, every other week on PICU and here in the paediatric team. The role in ED, they do part of their week on research and part on a clinical. So it's just about communication, getting the buy-in from the clinical team. The advantages of it are amazing. For an example is PICU, the engagement from PIs and clinical members of staff when we had appointed the joint role just increased phenomenally, and the activity on PICU has increased since that joint role. I don't know if Jen wants to add anything else.
Hi. Yes, thank you. Sorry. Did you want to jump in, Claire?
I was just going to say about the joint posts. Sorry, Jen and Jane sound so similar. Sorry. The joint posts are employed on one contract. So although they have two areas that they work in, they're actually on one contract with the clinical, in some of our joint posts anyway. The clinical area is the lead for the contract. And that helps to sort of minimize some of the complications you can get with joint posts. So just having that one contract for them works very well.
Yeah, we had the first joint role was a hepatology nurse specialist role many years ago in the research facility. And then some PICU staff joined us. So it really works well when the matrons or leaders in the clinical areas have, maybe part-time funding, and we have part-time funding because somebody's come back part-time from maternity leave, say, and it's a way of then creating this new role. And Marie Nelson, one of our other matrons, the trust-wide team matron, has really helped to increase the number of those joint roles across the specialty areas and teams. So it's wonderful to, and it helps to embed the research, because while they're working clinically, we often have nurses come flying down with consent forms saying, we've got somebody on the study, even though I'm not working today on research. And it just provides that extra input and
it's great
awareness.
When you have studies that are in the sort of ED, those kinds of areas, PICU, where you've got out of hours recruitment required, it really helps to keep that momentum going. Just having somebody with an ear open for a potential patient, or that works really well as well.
That sounds fab. I think it gives real champions in the areas then as well, doesn't it? And I think that's kind of the point. And there's so much talk at the moment about embedding and truly embedding research, not just embedding it, but truly embedding it. And how does that work, and what does that look like? And it feels like these types of roles are definitely a way forward to doing that. We've had something similar, particularly in our paediatric team. Where both of the two initial paediatric research nurses came on secondment, but was still part-time secondment each, but we're still working in the clinical area. So it was almost like this, but it was a taster. And they've carried on, although their official contracts are fully with research now, but they both do bank still in paediatrics. And it's amazing over the last few years just how that's grown. So it feels like that's maybe we've done what you've been doing and not realized that that's actually what we've been doing.
I think you're right.
But perhaps you have it in a more formal way.
But I think maybe we need to capture some of this, don't we?
Yeah, we do,
definitely. And say these are different models of joint working or joint roles, and here's some job descriptions, and here's how we went about doing it, little vignettes.
Definitely.
And
yeah,
that's something we
absolutely.
can capture nationally and share on our workforce site.
Yeah, without a doubt, definitely. And I think it's the sort of thing, our site size is so much smaller than Southampton. The infrastructure that you guys have is absolutely phenomenal. And it just shows what can be achieved with that. And then in the smaller sites, we're still achieving. It's a different type of achievement, and it's a different type of success, but it's still happening. And actually the things like this, like these types of models, it's worked for us and it's working for you. So it's having those sort of opportunities and those models that can spread across all types of different sites are really important. And it makes me think, okay, what about the care services? What about GPs? And it feels like it would work there as well. And I know that our community services up here have done something similar. Siobhan Parslow-Williams was key in that, and Helen MacDonald, who's the Chief Operating Officer now for CRN Eastern, and they were doing all sorts of work together around some of this as well. So it does feel like there's a lot out there. It's just we need to do something about pulling that together, don't we? So
yeah, I think it's good in areas where there's, traditionally nurses are difficult to recruit to, because I think it helps kind of hook nurses into that clinical area, because they also have a role within research as well. It's an attraction.
Yeah, absolutely. I can see Naomi. Sorry, go on.
I've unmuted Naomi so she can ask her question.
Hi, Naomi. Thanks for joining.
Hello. Sorry, I've got a funny light, so I look yellow. But thank you so much. Really interesting. I just had a question about well-being, given how much your workforce moved around and the scale of your work. And we've had challenges here. So I'm just wondering if you could tell us a bit about that.
We continue to have our one-to-ones with our staff, which we always have monthly anyway, but also we made the ones that were paediatric team redeployed to the ward, we kept in contact by email and just did like a weekly check-in with we're still here, even though you can't see us, we're here. Can I, you know, do you need to just pop down or anything like that? So open communication. And as a general leadership, there was a lot more updates, email updates with this is where the team are, these are the changes that happen. So trying to keep everybody informed. So I think those were the main ones. And then I think there were more sort of WhatsApp groups with people supporting each other, and even like maybe the band fives, their peers did that off their own back to support others that had gone to the wards and they hadn't. So that was some of the things.
Yeah, and I think it's still continuing. You know, we're not out of that place yet. So we're still looking to ensure that there's lots of different support mechanisms for people. In fact, now it almost feels like there's more of a need for it as people kind of come over the, you know, to the end of that sort of intense period. And I think that's now when this sort of difficulties are kicking in a little bit. So I think our trust have lots of different pathways for support. So as well as providing our own sort of support to our own teams, making sure that they also have that information about how to access the different support available. But yeah, I think for us, it's knowing that it's just because the intense period is over, actually now the team needs more ongoing support. And just, yeah, as Jane said, lots of communication. Jen.
I also just want to say that you and we were all working alongside the team. Yeah. So the ones that were still working, either in the inpatient work, the vaccine work, all of the different studies, there was a lot of visible leadership through that time. And then when I was offered this opportunity for the secondment, I was very concerned about stepping away. But because we had the support from our directors to create the acting matron role for Jane, I knew that having her there 7 days a week while I wasn't able to be would ensure that people still had that close relationship with the matron. And everyone, I think the band sevens and all the matrons have always had a very open door, very supportive way of working anyway. And we just ensured that those meetings continued by teams. We didn't stop any of our regular team meetings, and we kept bringing people together, even if there wasn't a lot that we had to say, except, aren't we very busy? And I think it's that sort of visible support has been helpful. And we've had wobbles, and we've had staff who've been unwell, and we've had to work even harder to support them. But I think seeing that we're trying to do all we can to support them has been helpful. And these two have been amazing, our two Janes.
And I think the trust that's been high on their priority, the well-being of staff. And now they're having rolling out specific well-being sort of meetings with each member of staff about COVID and how have you managed and what might be next for you and what can we do to help you.
Thank you. Anything else you'd like to add, Naomi, while you're still there? Thank you. I was just thinking, it's there's been lots of talk over the years as well around having making sure that research team have got that clinical leadership and how important that is. But one of the things that I definitely picked up from some of the work that I was doing a few years ago around structures and strategies was that it wasn't just about the clinical leadership, it was about it being meaningful. And I feel as though everything that you've just spoken about and everything that has been put in place demonstrates how meaningful that is and the impact that then has on your staff as well. So well done, everyone. Gordon, you look like you've got a question. I can see it in your face.
Thank you. That's just the quizzical look that I normally have. I think adding on to that, I think the wider team, I think one of your members of the team had said about them being named as on the papers that came from it, and it wasn't their primary motivation for doing the work, absolutely, but I think seeing clinical research nurses, especially in locally initiated studies, as co-investigators, and absolutely having that intellectual input into studies that more than justifies their names being on papers, rather than an acknowledgement that I mean, it's great to get an acknowledgement, but if people have had an intellectual input into studies, their name should be there as a co-investigator.
Yeah,
and I think that kind of demonstrates the leadership within the CRF team, but also the wider leadership and inspiration that can have for staff as well.
And we're sort of on that note, one of the things that quite a number of people have done is tried to push much more for nursing, midwifery and AHP principal investigators as well. I know that you guys have looked at that in the past, and I just wondered how that looked for you for COVID and whether that was something that you'd sort of pushed for as well.
Yeah, I mean, we do have a nurse PI for the COVID nurse study, which opened a few weeks ago now. So we were able to seize that opportunity, you know, straight away.
Yeah.
It came to us, you know, via our sorry, go on, Jen.
No, you go ahead. I'm waiting till you're done.
I trained. You carry on.
I just wanted to say that, you know, there's the associate PI scheme, and I'm touching on that this afternoon in my talk, which is an IHR scheme to encourage clinical staff to become investigators, associate PIs, and develop and embed research, obviously. So that's wonderful, but at the moment it excludes clinical research nurses. So locally, Marie Nelson, one of our other matrons, and I have had discussions with the lead at our site, our surgical lead for the associate PI scheme. And those discussions are taking place to say, actually, you know, we want our research nurses to be able to be part of that scheme where it's appropriate as well. So
yeah,
it's about still changing perception and pushing slightly where we need to. And I'm doing the same nationally, having the same conversation with the same people nationally as well now. So hopefully this pincer movement will create some change for all of us. They'll be tired of me turning up.
Thank you ever so much, everybody. And Team Southampton, that was fantastic. So I'm going to draw to a close now, because we're just knocking on 12 o'clock midday. So Gordon's kindly put up the schedule for the rest of the day so that everyone can see. We've got a large lunch break now so that people can get away from their screens and have some time away. And we'll be back at 1:30 with Exeter, Team Exeter. Followed by, we have Sabine, who is coming from Sweden. So she'll be joining us as well, which is really exciting, hearing a bit about what they're up to over there. And then we've got a vignette of videos for you. So short, snappy videos, which are brilliant, I have to say, because I've seen them all already. And then we have Emma Heron, who some of you may know from Twitter, who is, she's a blogger, she's a nurse blogger, and she's done all sorts of bits and pieces, but she's coming to talk about when yes isn't quite affirmative around conversations of consent. So really looking forward to that. And then we'll have a short break before the sessions this afternoon, where we're joined again by Jen, but also Bernie Welsh, who's a lead research nurse in Lanarkshire. And then Gordon and I are doing a wrap up to finish the whole of the international virtual visits. So thank you very much to everyone for joining. Gordon, is there anything you'd like to say before we go?
No, that's perfect. And thank you so much to everyone who's presented this morning. It's been fantastic, and it's just added to our already fantastic schedule, and more to come,
Absolutely. Just to say, if anyone, for those who are joining this afternoon, we will be leaving the meeting now, and we'll be rejoining and opening again at 1:30. So we won't be leaving it open. All right. So if you do want to join again, just pop back in and you'll go into the waiting room, and we'll let you back through at 1:30.
And
so
Laurie's
thank
just
you
come in.
very much.
Laurie.
Where's Laurie? I can't see
Laurie's
Laurie.
in a different time zone, I think.
Oh.
It's hard to keep track of them.
It is hard to keep track. So